Hi there folks, how's it going? Um, so I see there's a few of you here, it's nice to see. Rupert Chitter, how's it going? Who else? Phil, Teresa, nice to see you. So you've got your own account now, Teresa, very good. And Stuart. So just let everyone arrive and then we'll make a start. So I hope you've all had a good weekend. So it was nice weather. I mean, very warm, but obviously couldn't go out. But me and Rosa spent a bit of time in the garden, which was nice. So my dad was telling me he'd read this thing about the importance of vitamin D at the moment. So I think getting out there and getting a bit of sun is probably a good move. So I'm just going to swap the screen over. Oh, and Alison as well. Hi, Alison. Good to see you. Well, you can see me, but okay. A minute or so. So we're going to be doing perspective today. So this is actually week 4 now, as some of you who've been following will know. So that's says something really about how long this has all been going on. I say I was amazed how quickly the time's gone in some respects. So yeah, I mean it's been a strange, very strange experience, but I have really enjoyed this doing the YouTube videos, and it's nice to sort of connect with some of you and see what you've been up to. So so week 4. So hopefully you're getting a sense now about how these ideas that we've been covering all sort of tie up. So volume, scale, overlap, perspective. And, you know, I always think of it as like, let's do here, V, volume, scale, overlap, and perspective. Now, sometimes when you're learning a subject, I know it's a bit, people aren't very keen these days on like learning things by heart, but these 4 things here are something that you should, it'd be worth getting that down, memorizing it. And the time that you call on it is when you are setting up your scene. You're choosing what to do, you're looking at photo references, you're going out, maybe taking some pictures. You can think about these and they will help you to come up with better compositions. So that's really why it's useful. And also, all 4 of them work together to create this feeling of depth within the picture plane. So just being aware of that, why it's important, is really useful. Okay, I say if you can tune into this is like a sub-theme of painting, which is the ability to create this illusion of depth. So the more we can achieve that in itself will make for more successful paintings. Okay, so that's why this is important. So let's get into it. So what I'm doing here really is I'm sort of going over perspective really as a way for you to apply to still life and to when you're doing landscape. So what I could do is I could do a big elaborate drawing here using say 1 point perspective, but I really want to just focus on the essentials really, and then if it's something, because perspective is quite a large subject, it's one of those things that you might want to look around on YouTube, find other videos, because I can cover so much here. I can cover what I use almost like on a working basis, but it's a subject that goes, sort of quite deep, when you're looking at different things like whether planes tilt up or away from you, and there's sort of subtlety to it, which is which you just need, it helps to learn basically. So I'm going to go over it. We'll do 1 point perspective and 2 point perspective. Okay. So I'll do a quick diagram for you. Oh, Ellie's here. Hi, Ellie. So let's give ourselves a space here. So the first thing to establish when you're doing a drawing that you're trying to sort of find perspective or understand the perspective is to establish where your eye line is. Where's your eye level? Okay. So we talked last week about when you're setting up your still life, whether to bring your eye nice and low or to have it high. So that affects where that horizon line sits, like behind your objects. Okay, so understanding the horizon line. But if we put one on here, and so this is really about the idea of a flat plane. Now, say it might be, this might be obstructed, there might be hills or there might be something above that, but this is the idea of the earth as a flat plane, and that would be like as if you were looking out to sea. Okay, so that is our eye level. Okay, so that's the first thing you establish. And it's quite useful to establish that whatever you're drawing. Even in life drawing, I sometimes suggest students try to identify where their eye level, because as you look up, the forms are going to have perspective relating to your view and down. So it's always important to think about your eye level. Okay. Then for 1 point perspective, we find our vanishing point. Okay. Vanishing. So 1 point perspective is related to situations where objects are largely flat on at right angles to you. Okay, so if we give the most common example used would be like train tracks. So I'll use, or it could be a road or something like that. Okay, so there's our train tracks. With, of course, these becoming bigger. So this is like how scale ties up with perspective. So obviously this line, this distance is going to be substantially more than that distance and that distance. So they're getting closer and closer as you go away. Perspective is one of these things where the more sort of clues that you have that tie in with that perspective, the more convincing the illusion. Okay. So then we would have things like buildings. So for example, we've got a building here. Let's imagine it like going up and off. And then as it goes away from you, that also is going to go to that vanishing point. Like so. Okay. So now if this was, imagine this is brickwork, so this would already be quite useful, because we would be able to understand that as we go down from the the horizon line, this line gets steeper until it meets that line. And those go down. So these lines, they're basically parallel lines, but when seen in perspective, these ones come down, these ones tilt up. Okay. From this 1 point perspective, these remain flat. This is all sort of flat like that. Okay. And then you would also have things like, oh, that pen's Starting to run out now. Okay. So this might be a road again. So when you put these things on, say these are like paving slabs, that always helps. This helps communicate this feeling of depth, because again, you're using scale. You get the same thing if you had like lamp posts. And I say lamp posts are the sorts of things that are often used in these sorts of arrangements because they would help. Okay, so 1 point perspective all disappears into this bit here. Okay, and I say if the buildings stretch above, they would also all disappear down into that single vanishing point. Okay, so this can be quite a nice thing to play with. You can actually just construct arrangements with this. One of the exercises I did when I was doing my foundation course was about, in fact I'll show you this sort of thing. Let's see. So we would do things like this, as you would use your horizon line. Okay, something on the wonk there. And then on that basis, in fact some of you will probably remember this from my drawing term. So once you've got your back wall, you can then find the corners of the room. And so what I'm going to suggest for homework is that you're going to have a go at perhaps doing one of these more formal perspective studies using a ruler, and then do one where you're sort of doing it more from observation. Ooh. So let's imagine that comes down, that comes down. So that gives us our sort of interior space, okay? And then you could move the vanishing point depending on where you are in the room, okay? So then once you've got that established, then you can establish all sorts of other things in the room, windows or maybe furniture. In my mind, all these lines are going towards that vanishing point, okay? So learning perspective is, there's a lot, one of the skills is that you can almost imagine where that vanishing point is as you're drawing those diagonal lines, because you don't want to be drawing with a ruler all the time. So you want to sort of be able to roughly assume that this is going to tilt down, okay? So you look there, and you try and get that diagonal. Now these exercises can definitely cause problems, and it's not something that comes that easily to people. I say, if you think about it, perspective wasn't discovered really until the Renaissance time, so it's not something that's perhaps that obvious to people. But you need to practice with it, and then it will become more sort of second nature. Okay. So that's 1 point perspective, and I say I'll do some sort of demonstration drawing or something like this on Wednesday where I'll give an actual example, but that at least gives you the main horizon, eye level, vanishing point, and then all these lines sort of radiating in. Okay, so now we'll have a look at 2 point perspective. Okay, and this is basically where before we were either looking down corridors, looking down roads, perhaps in a cathedral looking down, and all these parallel lines all converging at this vanishing point. With 2 point perspective, it's like when you walk up to a building, but instead of being met by the face or of one side of the building, you're met with a corner of the building, okay? Or it could be the corner of a book or the corner of, you know, anything really, but it means that it's shifted so the corner is sort of facing you. So that's where you need to use 2-point perspective. Okay. Now, first little tip with 2-point perspective is you can't, you need to sort of draw, how would I describe this, in a relatively small plane, okay, compared to the distance of the vanishing point. So often in 2-point perspective, you might see one vanishing point, but the other vanishing point would be almost slightly outside of your field of vision. And you have to just bear that in mind when you do your drawing. So, but I won't over-labour that. We don't want to get too sort of technical. So here we go. So this is vanishing point 1, vanishing point 2. Okay, and then on that basis, I could construct just a few guidelines. Now, say graphic designers and people that do like comic book artists, and I'm sure architects, they have whole sort of grids of this already printed up, and you would just lie that behind your paper, or you could use it on Photoshop or something like that, and that would do that for you. But for our purposes, we're just trying to get the feel for it. I say if you're just aware of it and how it's affecting objects and interior spaces, that's really the main thing. Okay, so I haven't filled it out completely, but that gives me those are guidelines that I can then work things out with. So for this, I just quite like to do some sort of let's see, we'll do a sort of building that goes slightly above the horizon line. So if that comes up, it comes up like that. So this is what I mean, the corner is the closest bit to you, and then this comes away from you. Now that one, I haven't drawn enough lines, so I have to look at that line, look at the horizon line, and try and get the angle. Like so. Okay. And then if you were in a sort of technical drawing class, they would show you these sorts of things. So if you draw a cross on here, again, if you do it with your ruler, you'll get it super accurate. That's a way to locate the center of that square, which can be handy. And then from that, you can drop a line up or down, and that will help you locate the center, say, of a roof. And then that line is pretty much in the right place there. And there we are, we've got our sort of house sort of form. So this is when we're looking up at a building. So as I say, the higher the building goes, if we come up here, the steeper that line is. Okay, so that would be right up here. And then that's going to come down. You see, so this line becomes quite steep the higher up it goes, but that would, again, that would probably be outside. You'll get distortions if in reality it was outside of your field of vision, so you just have to be, I think there's a rule whereby this angle here shouldn't be any, is it acuter than 45 degrees? Actually, maybe it's 90 degrees. So it's a right angle basically. So it shouldn't get any narrower than that. Where it's useful for our still life is, let's say we have an object on a table and we're looking down on a table. Then we can get these lines. Say this is a book. Then we can understand how these lines are all converging. Okay. and the object there is in perspective. And so this is where it becomes really useful for us, for even still life subjects, is that if I draw a book, say I just draw a book on the side like that, and it's so narrow I can't see the top of that, and maybe there's some writing. It does nothing to, although the perspective is more difficult to draw, it actually serves a purpose in creating this depth. So you try to find a nice angle where you can get this 2-point perspective, okay? So yeah, so that's a quick overview of 2-point perspective anyway. So no questions. You see, I'm sure some of you come across this before, but I say it's the application of it that's the interesting bit, really. So let's put up another piece. So if I give some examples about how you might use this. So a good example of when people don't use this is if you have these sorts of compositions. Say you go out and you're looking out your window, or you go down to the river, say. For those of you in Woodbridge will know this one particularly. So you'll see this sort of thing. Okay, trees and perhaps a river. Okay, maybe a walkway and some boats, something like that. So you'll see this sort of arrangement. Now this is, I read in a book this was described as a flag composition because it's a bit like, say, the French flag. And you'll see that these lines here are basically parallel lines and they're taking our eye out of the composition. So again, that's not quite so good for creating the illusion of depth. Obviously you can use other things. You could use scale. You could have a big boat, medium boat and a smaller boat. Or you could have clouds, big, medium, small. So there are other ways to create depth, so it doesn't mean that you can never use that. But if you were thinking, how could I introduce perspective? Okay, then it's going to be much better to perhaps situate yourself. So there's your horizon line, and then maybe your river. Okay, let's say it's kind of like that. So if we introduce a bit of shoreline there or something. So this would be much better in terms of creating depth because we've got obviously a big stretch of river in the foreground and then it's getting narrower in the distance. Okay, and I've really exaggerated it there, so you could perhaps have other ones where it might just be more. Okay, it's a bit more like a road, but you could still have something like that. So all that helps to these diagonals. So whereas these are all horizontals, we've now got diagonals which are helping to pull our eye into the composition. So these are things that you want to think about when you're sort of choosing. I mean, another one that artists use a lot is if you're going out for a walk, then just find scenes where you've got a path. Okay, so if you've got a path, like so, then you've instantly got something that's like a perspective symbol that can just help to, you can have some people walking along that or something like that. But a pathway, it serves as a trick to sort of pull your eye into a composition, which is going to be better than a pathway that just cuts across, say, the front of the composition like that. Pathways are good. Other things you'll see like fence posts or telegraph poles or trees, big. Again, that would sort of follow this. Getting small into the distance. So you actually look for it. There's a good one outside my sort of where I live here, Spring Road, which a few times I've thought would make a good composition. I've probably shown you this. Is the viaduct. So the viaduct is like that. And then you've got basically a vanishing point of the road. So the road comes out and then disappears around that corner. Okay, but again, nice composition because although you've got this viaduct, these diagonals are strong enough to pull your eye in. Okay, so that's a bit more landscape, but with our, if we're thinking of doing still life, then other ways you could incorporate perspective. So normally with a still life you might see this sort of thing. Just a flat table, okay? Flat table with, say, some objects on. So that's obviously, you know, you can still introduce ways for your eye to move around that. But you could take your table, okay, and you could put it so that the corner faces you, okay? So now that gives you some perspective. And then you could lay books or things down, which is more challenging, as you can see, there we go. But you're going to be able to create this amazing feeling of actual space. It's a wine bottle, maybe, and some still life there. And again, thinking about volume, scale, you know, big to small, such and such, okay? So yeah, particular things that are particularly good with this are like books and blocks and just sort of almost man-made shapes lend themselves quite well to these sorts of exercises. So we're doing okay for time. So I thought also I would just, I think it was last year, maybe last year, I came across this, there's a few, you find it online, there's a website called Draw-a-Box, which has got some really good exercises for people learning to draw. So when I upload this, I'll try and put a link. How do you decide where, oh just wait, let's see, there's some questions. If both the vanishing points are off the canvas, are they likely to be? How do you work out the lines? Okay, yeah, so so that first one, Teresa, let's say here's our 6" by 6" canvas, and within it we're drawing a book, okay? So here's our book. Now it could be our eye level might even be up here because we're looking down at a table, okay? And our book is positioned in such a way that if the eye, the perspective lines would be going to these vanishing points that are far off in the distance, okay? Something like that. So in that situation, you basically, you can't rely on drawing it out. So I know, I mean, if you were doing this and it was important for it to be 100% right, then there are various things. Like, for example, you could work on a much bigger piece of paper or a bigger canvas, or you could use, there's a trick whereby, say you had this on a wall, on a little shelf, something like that. You could put a pin in here and a pin in here, and you can get a piece of string, and then you can hold that piece of string and pull it tight, and that will give you the right angle. So that's one way of doing it. But mostly it's going to be a case that you're just simply relying. You're simply relying on observation. But your observation, when you're doing it, you are just basically, in your mind at least, aware of these vanishing points. And that's all you can sort of rely on. It's just to know that they are there, and that if you carried this line and this line on up far enough, it would get to that vanishing point. Okay? So yeah, there are certain situations where it's not always going to be. You'll get the same thing when you're drawing, say you were drawing a landscape, and let's say you've got the corner of a building here. Now this one might go off to a vanishing point that's like, you know, way outside the canvas, whereas this vanishing point is within the canvas, so this might be a road. Okay, something like that. Okay, and again, it's often a case of you just need to be aware. That's not particularly convincing. You just need to be aware that that vanishing point is out there, basically. So that's what I would suggest. This is why my homework for you is to do some with the ruler, because actually using the ruler makes it harder, it makes it easier for you to anticipate where that vanishing point is and get these lines a bit more accurate. So that's not 100%. So getting them accurate for a while will just help you when you come to do it freehand. Okay. Rupert Chitter, is the far away roof slope parallel to the front one? Let's. No, actually, yeah, I can see what you've just asked me there. Yep. So there's our thing there. Okay, so I've just drawn that freehand. Not too bad. So I think what you're asking me is whether this line, okay, and this line are parallel. Okay, and the answer is that they're not. Basically this line and this line at some point up here would converge. Okay, so they're not parallel, so they would be going up to an imaginary vanishing point. Okay, and again, this is another case where that vanishing point is going to be outside of your vision. The fact is, if you did them parallel, it may be the case that you would get away with it and it would still be sort of convincing. But if you can be aware of the fact they converge, let's try and do another one. So this time I'm looking down on the building, like that. So this line comes here, so this line needs to be shallower, like that. Something like that, okay? So this line and this line should be converging, and that line should be converging. And this line and this line also need to be converging up here somewhere. Okay, so that's the theory. How do you decide where to put the vanishing point? Asks Stuart. So if you're in one point perspective, it's going to be fairly obvious. It's going to be the object that if you're looking down a road or you're looking down a street or a path, then it's looking down that path is going to be where your vanishing point is. But how I would describe it is, what you have to remember is that the vanishing point is tied up with the object. So the vanishing point doesn't actually exist, is the first thing. But depending on how the object is arranged, that determines where the vanishing point is. Okay, so for example, if we tilted this building so it now becomes much more like it's facing us, okay, it would now be the case that this vanishing point would be a lot nearer, like that, say. Let me sort of try and illustrate this again. Oh, no, just get another piece. Yeah, those are good questions though, because I say a lot of these things aren't that obvious. That's the thing about perspective, is you can't. It's difficult to work it all out intuitively. And some of these things, you know, you read bits, you come across new bits of information. But yeah, so think about the perspective. It's about the object that you're drawing, okay? So if this is my horizon line, okay, so if I do a book, let's say like that. So that's going to have a vanishing point, say here and here, okay? But then if I rotate the book like this and turn it towards us, okay, then the vanishing point becomes like 1 point. And it goes like that, okay? And then I could even turn the book, let's say turn the book you just have to think about the ratio of these sides to get the right. Okay, so this one now, this vanishing point is going to go up here, okay? So that's how you need to think. So each building, depending on your viewpoint, is going to have its own vanishing point. Normally the buildings though are going to be sufficiently, you know, everything within the building is going to be parallel, and so the vanishing point will serve you for that single building. But if things are skewed, or I mean, a good example is if you went to Lavenham or one of these villages, all the buildings are so skewed and distorted that your perspective won't be, you know, as much use to you. But yeah, think of it in relation to each object. Yes, each separate object has a different vanishing point. That's correct. It's obviously, that's how to think. So that's how to think of the vanishing point. But see what I need next time. I'll get the paper all in a great big pile and then take them off as I need them. So yeah, so you could have, for example, if we can see that, you can have 1 point perspective, say, and there's a road. Now, if all the shops and all the houses on that road are all done sort of parallel and at right angles, then they are all going to basically use the same vanishing point in 1 point perspective, okay? So this is a road and this is like, say, the pavement. But let's say a car comes along and the car is, say, parked at a funny angle, just for the sake of argument. So let's say the car is, so I'm just going to use a sort of book like construction, okay, and then we've got our car. So the car is therefore at a sort of funny angle, you see? So this car now is going to have its own vanishing point, which is over here and over here, and over here and over here, and over here. So that's what I mean by the objects themselves have their own perspective, but there are certain situations where they all, like I say, when you're looking down roads, where they all basically, it's the same vanishing point. Okay, so I think what will also help is if you do get the chance either to look at some reference material, if you find anything that's you don't understand how the perspectives work in, then you could always email me and I could have a look at that. So, but yeah, it takes a little while for it to sink home. So what else was I going to say? Yeah, so you've got the perspective as relates to objects. Another thing is, just as a principle, is this idea, which is that diagonal lines, because of vanishing points, diagonal lines tend to bring your eye into a composition, or they will move your eye around a composition, like this, say. And diagonals help sort of suggest perspective, even if it's, you see, like this. And how that relates to your still life is your still life can easily become like a flag, just horizontals. So often you'll see artists like to introduce diagonals to lead your eye in, okay? So there are various ways you can do that. So one of them is where they lay a diagonal, like a fork. I probably mentioned that one, okay? Let's say that's a fork, or a knife or something. Or you might have a tablecloth, and the tablecloth drapes down in a diagonal and then comes round like that, okay? You could also introduce more of your interior space, perhaps with windows or something like that, or just even the way you drape the fabric, can all help create diagonals which are pulling your eye into a composition, okay? So that's sort of one of the ways it relates to still life. The other thing with our still life subjects is, I say, if you can set things up so they're not just purely now a few apples on a plate, but also actually use the interior space. So, for example, like a table, okay, or maybe a hallway or something like that. So if you can find ways to use the interior to create the feeling of depth. In fact, even sometimes using the cardboard box, you know, just to when you set your still life up in a box or something, you can use the box just to create some perhaps diagonal lines coming in and a feeling of depth that way. Okay. And as I say, tilting the objects. So I did lose my track somewhere there. I did mention the drawer box thing, and drawer box was basically, it's a website to help you draw, and you practice drawing cubes. This is just one of the exercises. You practice drawing the cubes in different rotations, okay? And so, for example, so again, this is like the idea of different vanishing points. How would the vanishing points shift if you rotate it around? And it's a really good website, well worth checking out some of the exercises, because you're looking to be able, the more you can draw these sort of freehand, the more they're going to be useful for you when you're constructing more complex objects. So out of a good cube, you can also, you know, think of your spheres and be able to draw your construction around your spheres. Again, you can think of those as solid objects. That helps. And spheres, not spheres, cylinders. So there we go, cylinder in perspective with the lines converging, and that helps that feel like it's got some form. So yeah, drawer box, I would definitely check that out. And one of the exercises, in fact I might do this on Wednesday just to reinforce it, one of the exercises I really like to encourage people to do is this thing of just getting some books and stacking them up one on top of the other. And just, you're not worried about the titles on the books, you're just worried about getting these lines correct. and you can draw it freehand, and then you can actually get your compass or get your ruler out and draw these lines to the horizon and just see, did they converge, and did all the lines converge on the same eye level, the same horizon line. Okay, and so that's how you sort of develop it. So that's I'll just go over the homework and tell you what I'd like you to do. And you can, if there's any more questions, now's a good time to post them up. Okay, so homework. So I think first exercise is what I just mentioned. We won't do the draw a box thing, but I would recommend looking up the website. But I would say try this one, stack books. And then draw just using outline. You could just use some printer paper. If you use printer paper, you just draw, and you're looking to do, you do a drawing for say 10 minutes, rearrange the books, do another drawing, rearrange the books, do another drawing. That's one day. And then if you did that, even if you did one of those a day, actually your ability to get the perspective will improve. It might also help though, if it's wildly off, is to get it on a bigger piece of paper and actually draw out the vanishing points. Okay. All right. Oh, well, a satisfied customer, Teresa. Yeah, that's good. As I say, there are books on perspective where it gets much more in depth than this, like things like tiles on a floor and tilted planes, like Rupert Chitter mentioned, and how to include people in perspective. This is why one of the hardest subjects for an artist is probably, complex interiors with lots of people walking around, and then all the people have to be in the right scale and the right perspective. So but yeah, it's definitely something, because even let's say you were doing a dog portrait, for example, it's like faces and construction. So this isn't probably going to be very good, but let's say our ability to construct these forms here. So like say that's the nose, then that's in perspective. Okay, so and then that eye line is going to be a bit higher than that. Okay, and that's going to be a bit higher than that. Not sure what sort of dog this is, but let's say that's there we go. But although I've done it a bit crudely there, is these eyes, these ears, everything like that, you need to at least be able to understand the perspective to get those forms in. Oh, lucky he's off the side slightly there, so there's the nose. So yeah, so definitely something to practice with these basic forms. Okay, I think I'll leave that dog there. So yeah, stack books, draw the outline. That would be the first one. And then you could also do something with another line drawing, focusing on perspective of objects, maybe incorporating some books into a still life. Yeah. This is a drawing. But I want you to do one where you at least include the horizon line, the vanishing points and all that, all the construction. Okay, include the construction drawing. So with this one, number 2, I'm more interested in the construction aspect of it. Now, it doesn't have to be a still life if you want to do like a view down a road or something like that. or just an interior, but just as long as I can see the construction, see that you've understood the vanishing points, whether it's 1 point or 2 point. Okay, and then, then number 3, if you could do a little painting. And here I want you more just to go back, I want you to observe the perspective, okay? Now you might find using the books or the interiors useful, but go back to doing a painting and try your best to observe the perspective. Because what I'm trying to get you to do is, practice the theory and then incorporate that so that you can at least make a good go of it, even without getting all your rulers out and measuring things up. So you need to practice the theory and the observation sort of simultaneously, so that should make life a bit easier. Okie doke. So I think that's it for now. So we'll have a 10-minute break, and then actually, let's say 11 for those that are going to be joining me in the tutorial on Zoom. For the rest of you, I hope you enjoyed that and found something useful there. Remember, it really helps if you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, and yeah, thanks for watching. Okay, I'll see you on Wednesday when I'll do some sort of demonstration illustrating the points that I made this morning. Okay, so I'm not sure what subject I'll do yet, but we'll see what comes up. Okay, thanks a lot. I'll see you soon. Bye. This morning. Okay, so I'm not sure what subject I'll do yet, but we'll see what comes up. Okay, thanks a lot. I'll see you soon. Bye.